Hello, generations, young, old, and everyone in between. Welcome to Generation Apollo, where we only want what's best for all of America. And on this latest episode of Generation Apollo Reacts, I'm adding my commentary to the events that took place in D.C. last week. Now, although I am just as shocked as the rest of the world by what happened, I am, at the same time, also not the least bit surprised that it did happen. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look back on the last 4 years, and you'll see what I mean. From the moment Trump got into office, the Democrat establishment went on the attack, spending their every waking minute trying to overturn his presidency. For 2 years, the establishment wouldn't shut up about Russian collusion and spent millions on an investigation that ultimately produced nothing. Then, when that didn't work, they tried an impeachment process that also went nowhere. And just when it seemed like Trump was assured a second term, that's when the beer flu blindsided the whole world out of nowhere and completely derailed everything we had worked for. The establishment forced us into lockdowns that have nearly obliterated our economy, destroyed millions of jobs, and caused countless small businesses to shutter their doors, many of them permanently. And while all this was happening, our government promised us relief, so that those who lost their jobs wouldn't also lose their homes or be evicted because they couldn't make the rent. So we added $6 trillion to our already bloated national debt in just a few months. But when it came time to finally dole out the money, most of it ended up going into the pockets of major corporations that didn't need it to begin with. And what did we, the American people, get? We got $1,200. Despite all the trillions of dollars we printed, we only got $1,200 for the entire year. $1,200 in what is supposed to be the richest country on earth. In some places, that's not even 1 month's rent. And to top all that off, we just had the most divisive election in modern history. The establishment could have reflected on how their complacency and their arrogance resulted in such a humiliating loss to a former reality TV star in the last election. The establishment could have picked a younger candidate that would have appealed to a wider audience. And lastly, the establishment could have put forth sensible economic policies that would have benefited the average working American. But no, it didn't do that. Instead, the establishment picked the crustiest old boomer it could find and basically ran on the message of, vote for us because we're not Trump. And yet they still managed to win solely on the fact that Trump failed to prevent the pandemic. Well, that and a few other factors that I'm not supposed to talk about, not without incurring the wrath of the YouTube police, because YouTube is so confident about the election outcome that we're not even allowed to question it anymore. But we all know what I'm talking about. And so, all of this has culminated into the perfect shitstorm that finally exploded on Wednesday, with so many people feeling disenfranchised, mentally warped and agitated by a biased mass media, and hopelessly frustrated at career politicians not fulfilling their promises. So, I am not the least bit surprised at what happened in D.C. This is what happens when you call half of the American population deplorables, and you don't listen to them, and then you try to force them into destitution. And let's also not forget that the establishment was supporting the quote-unquote mostly peaceful riots of Antifa and BLM for months and refusing to prosecute most of the rioters involved. Now suddenly, I'm supposed to believe that the establishment cares about preventing violence? Well, in the words of our president-elect, I just have one thing to say to that.
Give me a break.
But anyway, the damage is done now, and this event will forever stain Trump's legacy. And combined with the administration's failure to prevent the pandemic, in my opinion, this has destroyed any chance that Trump might have had of running again in 2024. And now that he's exhausted all of his options and has officially conceded, it's time to exit stage left. Of course, I am deeply disappointed in how things have turned out, but I am also still optimistic, because Trump's presidency has sparked a national movement that will continue long after he's gone. His presidency, combined with the pandemic, exposed just how dysfunctional our political establishment truly is. Trump's presidency also showed us that it is possible for a political outsider to beat the system and achieve the highest office. Despite his failures, I believe these are the two biggest successes of the Trump era. And I also still firmly believe that we desperately need a non-establishment candidate if we ever want to solve America's long-term problems. Although Trump was far from perfect, he was the first candidate to meet that criteria. He was a test run to see how such a candidate could handle the job. But this was also a test to see how the establishment would react to that kind of candidate. And from what I can see, it has showed us with painful clarity just how far the establishment is willing to go to hold on to power. Again, although Trump was far from the ideal candidate that we would have wanted, he has paved the way for future candidates, hopefully ones that can learn from his mistakes and build upon what Trump started. My point is that, while we may have lost the battle, the war is still far from over. There's a big storm looming on the horizon, and it's going to be a rough one. It's already started. Trump is now getting the Alex Jones treatment, along with several others who are also being purged off of mainstream social media platforms. So, if you value freedom of speech and you haven't made the jump to alt tech yet, you better do so now, because I have a feeling that that decision will be made for many of you sooner rather than later, myself possibly being included. And for those of you who are cheering for this online censorship because you think that the right-wing extremists are finally getting what they deserve, are you guys really that stupid? You should know that this never ends well. You cheer now because people you hate are being silenced. But when it eventually happens to you, and it will, I'm sure that you won't be cheering then. Because if the President of the United States can be silenced by big tech, so can all the rest of us. Is that really a precedent you want to see come to fruition? Some of you are even saying that this is the free market at work because Google, Facebook, and Twitter are private companies, not the government, and they've decided that they don't want extremists on their platform. And you're saying this to silence all of your opponents who are crying about communism. Okay, here's the problem. This isn't actually the free market working. If the free market truly was at work here, you could just go and move to a new social media site or network if you didn't like any of the big ones. Or you could build your own if you really were ambitious. But now that's becoming extremely difficult to do because the internet has become so centralized in the hands of big tech monopolies that they control all the major hosting. So unless you have the money to build your own hosting network, you're at the mercy of Google, Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, etc. The truth is, this isn't about extremists breaking the rules. This is about the established tech giants protecting their monopolies. And they're using their monopolies as a way to force their political values on the rest of us. So the government doesn't actually need to spy on us and tell us what to think because they already have big tech to do that dirty work for them. It's amazing how so many of you shriek at the mere mention of the government spying on you, but Google, Apple, and Facebook have already been doing that for years, yet hardly a peep out of most of you. But it seems like most of you are okay with your information being tracked if it allows Google to recommend the best sushi restaurants near you. Okay, I'm getting far off topic here, so I just want to say that I am hopeful that in the not-too-distant future, we will eventually elect someone who is what we had all wanted Trump to be. Someone who will fight for the American people, but hopefully with fewer character flaws. The next few years will be crucial. Don't get discouraged. There is light at the end of the tunnel, but we're going to have to go through hell to get there. So try to stay optimistic. The fight has only just begun. And with that, I'll end this short video here. So, what do you all think? Are we in for dark days ahead? Is there any hope that we'll pull through this? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoy the content that I produce, please subscribe, like, and share this video to help my channel grow. Also, if you have subscribed to my channel, please check to make sure that you haven't been unsubscribed, as I'm fairly sure that I am now being shadow banned. And finally, please be sure to also follow me on alt tech platforms, so that I and others who value freedom of speech can continue to have a voice in the face of ever-increasing internet censorship. The links to all my pages will be in the description. So thanks again for watching, and thank you for tuning in to Generation Apollo.